start at 24, verse 3. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many.
Josephus writes in 75 AD about all the things that happened before 75 AD, especially in 70 AD, from 67 to 70 AD, the points leading up to the War of the Jews. And he accounts many of these false prophets that we even see throughout the book of Acts. We see Simon the magician popping up. We have all these false prophets, even in the book of Job. It tells you that these are the false prophets that you were warned about. But even throughout history, AD 35, we hear about Dositheus, the Samaritan, who had the boldness to assert that he was the Messiah. Josephus records this. In AD 38, we hear about another Samaritan who appeared and declared that he would show the people the sacred utensils that were deposited by Moses in Mount Gerizim. In AD 55, we hear about Felix, the celebrated Egyptian impostor who collected 30,000 followers and persuaded them to accompany him to the Mount of Olives, telling them that from this day that they would see the walls of Jerusalem fall down at his command. And in AD 60, we have Porcius Festus, another distinguished impostor, seducing the people, promising them deliverance from the Romans. So we clearly see the false Christ being fulfilled from AD 33, when Jesus was crucified, up to AD 60.
Continue at verse 6. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come.
It's so easy to look in our day and age, with time filled with war, to say, wow, look, it's fulfillment of prophecy, it's fulfillment of prophecy. But the thing is, when you look in the Jewish time, and you look in the time when Jesus was around, he was making these prophecies, they were under the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, that kept war. There was no war because everybody was under this Roman Empire. And basically that goes to show that when the 60s occurred in AD 60, and wars started to break out, the Zealots started to fight against Rome, and other Jewish people started to riot and things like that, it was irregular and noticeable that wars were beginning. Kingdoms were turning against kingdoms. So that clearly shows a fulfillment before 70 AD.
That ties into verse 7, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And it also goes to say there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains.
If you read Josephus, you read other historians, Philostratus, you read Tacitus, you read all these different historians, they show accounts of earthquakes happening in Judea, earthquakes happening in Laodicea, or Laodicea, however you say it. You read Eusebius, and you read about Hierapolis and Colossus, these places where all these earthquakes began to happen, and there was even big how do you say the word? Cataclysmic.
Human dictionary.
Issues happening within the Roman world, within the Roman Jewish context, right before 70 AD. And concerning famines and sicknesses, you have those times were so distraught that you had mothers not feeding their infants. They would take food away from their infants. You had fathers taking food away from their children. There's even the story we discussed where people would actually back up other people's system to cut open their stomach and eat the food that was inside these people. And just some really horrible stuff. There were women eating their children. This is the famines that were happening before the War of the Jews. So, and you read about all of these in Josephus and his books. I strongly advise that we begin to understand what happened after Jesus resurrected and sent the church into the world, and history. What happened up till 70 AD. And you'll begin to see all these prophecies were fulfilled.
So that goes right into verse 9. Maybe we're talking, and it says, then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but he who stands firm in the end till the end will be saved.
I know it's another big issue to look at our world today with all the sin, the prevailing sin, which I believe is the effects of sin. But it's even more important, if you haven't already noticed the increasing of wickedness and the false prophets in this time, that, it was known that best friends, people that were, aligned with each other, would start fighting over food. It was so serious of a time that people knew destruction was upon them. You have to imagine people knowing that God's destruction is upon us. And there was such fear of people rioting, and you had the Jewish zealots running around rioting and causing issues within the holy city. So this time clearly showed that there was some real issues happening before 70 AD. Real quick, just to deal with the persecution aspect. You read through the book of Acts, you begin to see the persecution of the Christian church. And we see Christians being persecuted all the way up till 70 AD and even after 70 AD, but the fact of the matter is that it began and the apostles were all pretty much killed. Yeah, all the apostles were killed before 70 AD. So not all, but most of them. Let's keep it correct. All of them, not all of them, but most of the apostles were already killed. I believe John the Apostle was the only one that made it out of the tribulation period.
Alright. And verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come.
Dealing with the gospel preached to all nations, this gets to be the funnest text.
Yeah,
This is the one where everybody thinks that, there's the gospel is yet to be preached to all the nations. This is where I have to demonstrate that in their world, for that matter, the gospel was preached to all nations. Here we're going to turn to Scripture. Real quick, I want to read Romans chapter 10, 17 through 18, where it says, "So faith comes from hearing, and hearing of the word of Christ, by the word of Christ. But I say, surely they have never heard, have they? Indeed they have. Their voice has gone out into all the earth, and their words to the end of the world." And then we have in Colossians 1, 5 through 6, the word of truth, the gospel, which has come to you just as is in all the world, also is constantly bearing fruit and increasing. And we have some more.
Yeah, Mike, also in Colossians 1:23, it says, if you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held on to out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant.
Every creature under heaven. You got another one for us?
Yeah, Romans 1:8. It says, "First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world."
All over the world. All right, so we already see the kingdom gospel being preached all
We
over the
still
world.
got one more, Mike.
All right.
Acts 17:6. It says, now this is Paul in Thessalonica. It says, "But when they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some other brothers before the city officials, shouting, 'These men who have caused trouble all over the world have now come here.'"
All over the world. All right. Does that fulfill that for us?
I think it's all over the world. All right. So verse 15. So when you see standing in that holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in the winter or on the Sabbath.
So now we're dealing with the abomination of desolation that was prophesied by Daniel. I'm going to ask that we turn to Luke 21, verses 20 and 24, because it clearly illustrates this point a little bit more. For those of us that might not understand the prophecy of Daniel, because it was a Jewish prophecy. So Luke, writing to the Gentile church, explains this a little better. And he says, "When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of fulfillment, in fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be for those in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land, wrath against the people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken prisoner to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled." So we clearly see that this time of desolation, this time of when the Christians are going to flee the city, is when the Roman army begins to surround Jerusalem. And we clearly see this is what happened in 70 AD.
Verse 21. Right, again in Matthew 24. Then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days would be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here's the Christ," or "There he is," do not believe it. For false Christians and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I've told you this ahead of time.
So here we see that we're getting into the tribulation period, and this is where now there's going to be these false Christs, these false messiahs that are about to pop up to tell the people, go out into the desert. And history records that this is what was prolonging the Roman siege against Jerusalem, was that there were these men encouraging the Jewish zealots that they needed to, that God was about to deliver them, to keep up their work, to, that he's about to come, he's about to save you. So these zealots would continue their energy against the Romans and would continue the war, and it would continue the destruction of Jerusalem. So we see that this is going to be a time where it's about to be a time of great distress. And there's about to be false reports of the deliverer coming to save you, which pretty much serve to encourage these zealots to keep up their fight. And with that, now after this we're about to head into the second coming, which we will deal with in another video. But we see this is all the tribulation that's leading up to, this point. This is what Jesus is telling them that is about to occur. And I just want to really stress the point that it's so important to understand what happened after the resurrection of Christ and what happened through history up until 70 AD, the war of the Romans and the Jews.